In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Tonight is our class 22 of our Orthodox Survival course. We're going to talk again tonight about the French Revolution, continuing our discussion of the French Revolution as the opening war, the opening explosion of the current age of revolution against the Constantinian order that Dr. Pitos spoke about so well last week. I'm going to start with a very inspiring quote. Our country is ourselves. It is our villages, our altars, our graves, all that our fathers loved before us. Our country is our faith, our land, our king. But their country, what is it? Do you understand? Do you? They have it in their brains. We have it under our feet. It is as old as the devil, the world they call new, that they wish to found in the absence of God. They say we are slaves of ancient superstitions. It makes us laugh. But in the face of these demons, who rise up again century after century, we are youth, gentlemen. We are the youth of God, the youth of fidelity, and this youth will preserve for its own and for its children true humanity and liberty of the soul. There's a quote from a speech to his officers by Francois Athanase de Charette, who was one of the commanders of the Catholic and Royal Army of the Vendée. There's the peasant uprising in the west of France against the revolutionary government. These stirring words sum up the difference between the Christian and Constantinian order of the Old Europe and the New World Order promised by the Antichrist revolution. It is the difference between reality and delusion, between the love of life, that is, between the love of life and the worship of death, between God and the devil. The speaker, a very young man, who died for the cause of his faith and his king at age 32. And when he died, he was so brave, he gave the command to fire. The revolutionaries had arrested him, and actually I visited in France, the chateau where they had him imprisoned and where the doctor he was so full of wounds from his capture, he fought very bravely and they wounded him many times. And I saw the table in the kitchen in the chateau where they had him imprisoned, where the doctors saved his life. The revolutionaries saved his life so they could put on a big trial, and mock him and so forth. But when the time came, he was executed in the square, I think in Nantes. And thousands of people showed up to see him because he was such a brave hero and in sympathy. And even the Republican officer who had to give he couldn't bear to give the order to fire, and Charette gave it himself.
We have such a situation in our history.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly the same.
Same thing. So he saw very clearly truths about the Antichrist revolution. One, the revolutionaries always promise a new world. This is new, right? But there's nothing new about it. Right? There's nothing new about this program. All of their complicated, mystifying ideological verbiage, liberty, freedom, liberation, equality, economic systems, blah, blah, blah. It conceals something very simple, and it's very old. It goes back to paradise, which is a satanic revolt against God. That's all it is. Okay. Second, the country of the revolutionaries is in their brain, not under their feet. It is delusion, not a reality. That's why you always have to be careful when people say, well, our country is an ideal. It's an idea. That's why all the American political thought about America as an experiment, America as an ideal, this is fundamentally, it's demonic. That's a demonic way of thinking about your country, right? Because it's not real. It's in the realm of delusion. It's a creation of the brain. And it's good. And I use the word brain on purpose. Oh, he uses the word brain. It's in their brains. He didn't say their minds. He didn't say their souls. Because in French, of course, you can say mind or soul. He said in their brains, right? It's in their corrupt, materialist conception of reality, right? So we have to be very careful of these utopian, fantastic ideas about a country as an ideal or something over the horizon or something we're creating. Okay, these are all false promises, right? A true Christian traditionalist does not have an ideology. Okay? Every ideology is an idol. It makes the heart sick. Every idol makes the heart sick. And ideology makes the heart sick. We have our faith. Okay? We have our beliefs. We have our traditions, but we don't have an ideology. We have our church, king, homeland, family, property, the woods near our homes, the river where we fished when we were children. Okay? These are the realities of life. Okay? And when you're dealing with you stay away from, in our Orthodox spiritual psychology, we know we have the reality of plani or prelest, spiritual delusion. We stay away from delusion by dealing always with the realities of life. Right? It is for these that he fights, not an idea. Right? The revolutionaries claim to fight for ideals like liberty and so forth. But it's very important to understand that these people are demonically deluded. All these revolutionaries, all these Masonic lodges, all these theorists, the philosophers, Rousseau, Voltaire, all of them, they're demonically deluded. These are people, they are seriously deluded. Okay? People like Robespierre and Marat in the French Revolution, or Saint-Just, who's actually probably the most demonic of all of them, or Stalin or Trotsky in the Russian Revolution, these people can, it's very important to understand their mental and their spiritual state. These are people who can function daily for years or even decades in what is essentially a hypnotic state. They're essentially in a hypnotic state. Anybody in serious demonic delusion is in what a psychologist could identify as a hypnotic state. Okay? They're receiving constant input from demons who reside in their brains. Right? And that's the only explanation for the extreme evil, and I'm going to, with some reservations, I'm going to state some of the things that these French revolutionaries did.
It's continuous.
Yes, and it's continuous, yes. Third, the revolutionaries always say that churchmen believe in superstitions. The Christians believe in superstitions. But it is their absurd beliefs that are irrational. Their beliefs are so irrational. They were descended from monkeys, for example. Something like that. They're so rational as to be absurd. A normal person would just laugh at them. It's laughable. He says, we laugh. Charette says that we're laughing at their ideas, right? But a lot of people today, and people even then, won't laugh at the ideas for the same reason they don't laugh at modern art, for example, at a Picasso or something. If you were a normal person and you didn't think you were expected to admire Picasso, you wouldn't say you admire. You said, this is junk, this is weird. It's disgusting. Obviously, the person had a deranged mind, right? But they don't laugh at it because other, more powerful people force them to pretend that these stupid things, whether Picasso or democratic ideals or modern art or gay marriage or whatever, are profound and important. These are important. Oh, these are profound. These are advanced, you see. When actually they're just demonically idiotic. They're demonic and they're actually, on the human level, they're extremely stupid. Okay? That's why Charette says, we laugh. We laugh at your claims, right? And the demons are laughing too. They're making fun of their human tools that they're using. The demons are laughing at them too. Okay. Fourth, Charette says, we are the youth. They claim they're the future. No, we are the young ones. You see, those who believe in Christ, who fight for the truth, are forever young. St. Paul says that Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. St. Augustine says the church is forever ancient, forever new. It's upside down to say that the revolution represents youth and vitality, and the counter-revolution represents tottering old age. Oh, you old priests, you old monks, you old ladies who go to church. I remember years ago when Russia was opening up back in the late 80s and early 90s, CBS, one of the mainstream networks, actually did a whole special on religion behind the Iron Curtain. And they're on a street in Kiev or somewhere, and people are passing in front of the church. And the commentator, it's at the end of the show, and the commentator says, well, Lenin says, Lenin said, when this generation of old ladies dies away, there will be no more church. Then it shows an old lady walking in front of the church. It's 1989, the old lady's walking in front of the church, she's making her cross. And the commentator says, well, the old ladies, Lenin's dead, and the old ladies are still here.
I hope he was not fired.
Pardon me?
I hope he was not fired.
I don't remember which one it was, but I hope he wasn't fired yet. So it's the revolution, the Antichrist revolution that worships corruption and death. Everything that they worship is death. It has to do with death, right? And the counter-revolution, the Christian counter-revolution, fighting back, the people who fight back, We fight for that which is the source of the life that never grows old, for life, the possibility of life, the possibility of love. Okay. Now let's talk about the myth of the French Revolution. And this is the myth I think that everyone's been taught. The myth of the French Revolution that we were all taught in school, that is, those of us who were old enough to have been taught anything, when schools were still teaching things, right? Even wrong things, at least we were taught something. Right? But the myth of the French Revolution in the English-speaking world, and I can only speak for that, that's my background. I don't know who the main authors are, the main historical authors are in other languages. But in the English-speaking world, the myth of the French Revolution is primarily the work of two men, the Scottish philosopher and social critic Thomas Carlyle and the novelist Charles Dickens. Carlyle's 3-volume History of the French Revolution, published in 1837, became the accepted truth, became the Bible for all Anglophones. And what the Anglophones believe is very important, right? Because the Anglophones ran a great deal of the world for a long time. Very formative part of the 19th and 20th centuries, right? So Carlyle's 3-volume History of the French Revolution, published in 1837, became the accepted truth of the revolution in all the Anglophone countries. And then Dickens' novel Tale of Two Cities, which I've read several times, is a beautifully written book, right? And it's probably structurally and artistically, it's probably his best book. His novel Tale of Two Cities, 1859, which Dickens said was inspired by Carlyle's work. So Dickens was drawing on Carlyle. That was Carlyle's version of the revolution. And his novel probably had even greater influence, right? Because the masses read the novels, and artistic depictions of historical realities grab the heart. They grab the imagination. For example, Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is a fictional portrayal of slavery in the American South, right? But it influenced far more people than all the tracts of the abolitionists or all the speeches of the abolitionists. Nobody remembers now speeches by William Lloyd Garrison or Frederick Douglass or people like that, only specialists. But everybody knows about Uncle Tom's Cabin, right? So the images that Dickens paints in Tale of Two Cities paints so beautifully, so artistically, so sympathetically, really grab the imagination, and this is the picture of the French Revolution that all literate English speakers have had now for generations. So how does the myth go? It goes like this. Once upon a time, there was this bumbling, stupid, soft-headed king in France who had a selfish, silly wife who all she cared about were her dresses and perfume and parties and things. And they were surrounded by uniformly rapacious and vicious nobles and propped up by a corrupt, phony church organization whose clergy were debased degenerates and cynics who didn't really believe in their religion. They were just using their power to defraud and tyrannize the downtrodden peasantry. Except for a little group of really rich people, everybody was starving. And the country was going to ruin. Finally, the poor, downtrodden people couldn't take it anymore, and spontaneously the poor rose up, led by some idealistic heroes who got rid of that nasty king and the nobility and the church, and they replaced that old superstitious religion with a new liberating religion of reason and tolerance. Unfortunately, the downtrodden masses and their heroes, being unstable Frenchmen, remember this is an Englishman talking, they're unstable Frenchmen. The French are a little off. Any Englishman will tell you the French are not all there. So they got carried away, and they did some bad things. They did get carried away. They did a lot of bad things, like chopping off a lot of heads.
About 1 million.
Pardon me?
About 1 million.
We don't even know. At least 1 million. In the Vendée alone, they probably killed 350,000 people. Not with the guillotine, but with mass shootings, drownings, burnings. The infernal. I think I mentioned the infernal columns, where at the end of the Vendéan Revolution, counter-revolution, the Vendéans finally were in retreat, and the Republican army went through, and they stood man to man across miles, solid, shoulder to shoulder, killing and burning every living thing, man, woman, child, beast, and plant. And probably 350,000. In one group of 100,000 were in a long exodus or pilgrimage across the Loire trying to escape them. But probably 350,000 were killed. That doesn't count all the people guillotined in Paris. Okay. But overall, see, the myth goes, overall, this revolution was inevitable. It was inevitable. It had to happen, right? The course of history, Dickens paints this picture, of hearing in the future at the beginning of the book, which is the beginning of the book. The book begins in in the 1770s, 1780s, and he said, but in the rumble of the carts leading to the guillotine can be heard, coming from the future. It's inevitable. He's painting this picture of inevitability.
It was the description.
Yes, they teach word by word, inevitable.
No, but the whole thing.
The whole thing, yeah. But the revolution was inevitable, and it was necessary. But we sensible British people have to institute a lot of the same changes. Dickens was a big progressive. He wanted to institute a lot of the same changes, but gradually, so that we do not have to chop off a lot of heads. You see, and that's what's true. The British liberals did institute changes and they transformed their country gradually and brought about greater and greater secularization, greater and greater materialism, greater and greater humanistic approach to life without a violent revolution, because their church had already been tamed, so to speak, by the government centuries before. Whereas in the French Revolution, they had to burn it to the ground to stop it, to stop its influence. Now, neither Carlyle nor Dickens were traditional churchgoers. They were both baptized in their state church. Dickens in the Church of England, Carlyle in the Church of Scotland. But personally, they were deists and humanists. They were progressives. Right? The main difference there was a difference between them. The main difference between them was that Carlyle tended to be pessimistic about the possibility of perfecting human society. Carlyle basically said, we have to try, but I don't have much hope for it. Whereas Dickens believed in a sentimental view of the fundamental goodness of human nature. See, all of Dickens' novels end with some kind of fundamentally sentimental and optimistic view of human nature. If we just get rid of a few bad people, then everything will be fine. Being Scottish and English, however, they both disliked fanaticism. They disliked mobs and head chopping. It's not nice. The British people don't like things that are not nice. They're not gentlemanly, right? And therefore they deplored what they regarded as the excesses of the French Revolution. This is what we American children were always taught about the French Revolution and even the Russian Revolution. Oh, they were just excesses. The problem was not the basic ideas, the problem was the excesses that they went to. Just excesses. But they agreed with its critique of the Ancien Regime, of the old regime in France, and the revolutionary vision of a humanistic reign of progress and reason that was inevitable. It had to come, right? Another interesting idea is that Carlyle, influenced by German idealism, which was very big then, right? All the intellectuals on the continent and even some in England were influenced by German idealism. Okay? He believed that every age has a spirit of the age. Right? History marches along and every age has its spirit. And that great men must ride the tide of this spirit. They have to harness it to accomplish great things. Now this is the opposite from Tolstoy, who in War and Peace says it doesn't matter. It could have been Napoleon, could have been anybody. The history produced this person. But Carlyle had more of this heroic or romantic idea of the great men who make things happen. They harness the spirit of the age. Of course, this spirit of the age is something very vague, because being a deist, he has no realistic conception of spiritual life. So when people like this say a spirit or spirit of the age, they don't even know what they're talking about. It's a vague word that they just mean, I guess they mean a collection of feelings of people. They don't even know what they're talking about, unless they really do know and they mean something demonic.
Probably it was just a job.
Just a job to write this stuff, perhaps. Napoleon, then, for example, is the inevitable outcome of the revolution. He was the great man it produced. Note that all of this vague, pseudo-mystical, and all of this is vague and pseudo-mystical and impersonal. It's just blah blah. The people, the spirit of the age, the great man. These are all vague ideas that sound very important and almost mystical, but they actually don't mean anything that you can really put your finger on.
Beyond the horizon.
They're beyond the horizon, yes. You just don't understand because you're not advanced enough, right? It completely obscures the reality, all this pseudo-mystical verbiage. Okay? it completely obscures the reality that this revolution, like all the subsequent revolutions of this revolutionary age that we're still in, were planned carefully, long in advance. It wasn't just some impersonal spirit of the age, some mystical historical process. It was real people influenced by real demonic intelligences who made plans to do these things, and they did them.
It means that the writers were also.
And the writers were in the service of this program, whether they were just useful idiots or whether they were in on the game. Okay. And these men used the most devious and cynical means to bring about the results that they wanted. There is indeed a revolutionary spirit, but it's a spirit of Antichrist. Right? And the great men who harness this spirit are possessed demon worshippers. That's why they join these lodges, they join these secret societies, participate in secret ceremonies, right? And they're using demonic intelligence and demonic power to bring about their ends. Okay? Only mass hypnosis could explain why suddenly whole populations of people just lose their minds and do things they never would have dreamed of doing. See? And some of the things that they did are just they're so horrible. We're sitting in the church giving this talk, and I hate even to say some of the filthy, disgusting things, evil things that these people did. Now, this does not mean that pre-revolutionary France was a paradise of some kind. We're not going to paint a false picture that they had no problems. First of all, their faith was the heretical faith. It was the papist faith, not the Orthodox faith. We all Orthodox always have to keep that in mind. And obviously they had social, economic, and political problems. Okay, Carlyle and Dickens wouldn't be credible if they were working if it was a complete fabrication. They took data, real data, and then they exaggerated, twisted it, used it to paint a certain picture. These problems were grossly exaggerated by the propaganda of the secret societies, which worked for decades relentlessly to overturn the traditional order. It's like our media today. They just say something enough. Oh, like today, it's, we have to have immigration reform, by which they mean we have to open the borders and let everybody in. We have to have reform. We're perishing without reform. We have to have immigration reform. They say it over and over and over again, when actually nobody here wants it to go on. You know, you talk to Anglos, you talk to Romanians, you talk to the Mexicans, you talk to the blacks. Nobody wants more immigration. Everybody says it's enough. Enough's enough. But the elite, right, keep saying these things over and over again. They put it out as propaganda. Okay. And this is but these methods are the exact same used in the 18th century by the French elite, the revolutionary elite, that is, which worked for decades relentlessly to overturn the old order. Remember, if you say a lie often enough, again and again and again, you say a lie, after all, people start to accept it. Now remember, in our last class, we talked about applying the standard of primary goods versus secondary goods. Of course, it would be a good if the administration at Versailles had been wiser and had done some land reform and helped the peasants in their lives and so forth and so on. Okay. But for the sake of supposedly achieving secondary goods of people having more food or avoiding injustices committed by the nobility or the clergy or whatever, the revolutionaries violently overthrew primary goods, the traditional understanding, traditional structures of church, king, family, homeland, even the days of the week. They got rid of the days of the week. They got rid of the entire calendar and invented their own calendar. Their program was to destroy everything.
From 1 to 10.
Was it 1 to 10? A metric week?
Yeah, and also Stalin did this.
Stalin did the same thing.
10 days.
10 days, yes. And they started naming children Victory of the Proletariat and Tractor.
Stalin.
Yes. So that they overthrew these primary goods, things that are so fundamental to people's lives. Okay? And they replaced them with something totally artificial and destructive, totally unreal, and created consciously in a revolt against God. It was something completely negative, completely destructive. Right? So what's the reality? As we saw earlier in our classes on the Enlightenment, the ideas of Rousseau and Voltaire and the encyclopedists were spreading for decades before the Revolution. It wasn't just some spontaneous uprising of the downtrodden peasantry who decided, enough is enough, we don't want no king, we want liberty, equality, and so forth. Okay, they were spreading these ideas systematically, consistently for decades. Right? Secret societies full of privileged, not downtrodden people, infiltrated the church, the court, the nobility, the intelligentsia, and so forth. It's the same pattern they used again in Russia, in Eastern Europe, same old stuff. But the French Revolution was the big dress rehearsal for what was to happen later on. And they spread their propaganda that the monarchy had outlived its usefulness, the Christian faith was a superstition, science has now told us that there's no such thing as a resurrection or a soul, on and on and on. So forth. And what's another method? They practiced ruthless character assassination. Okay, what's your idea of Marie Antoinette? Everybody say, oh, she was this silly, foolish, frivolous person who just cared about her dresses and balls and jewelry, and she said, let them eat cake, and so forth and so on. Whereas actual biographers who studied the correspondence of Marie Antoinette, who studied journals of her personal acquaintances, found a person who was highly intelligent, very educated, very religious, and a very good mother, very devoted to her family. You see, so really a model wife and a mother. See, so the same thing happened with the empress in Russia, right before the revolution. The wife is it's a man's weak link, right? They can't. They want to attack the man, they attack him through his wife. So they said about the Empress Alexandra, she's a Russian spy. She's dominated by Rasputin. The whole Rasputin, not Russian, a German, excuse me. Of course, she was German. A German spy. She's a German spy. She's a tool of Rasputin, and the whole thing about Rasputin, and so forth. These are the same old stuff. Character assassinations. And remember, the prophecies of Saint Nicholas the Merstreamer, where he said that when those days come, they're going to rule by secret methods. Right? One of the secret methods is character assassination. Okay. So they practice ruthless character assassination against the king, the queen, and people loyal to them. Now, all of this is laid out in the books I recommended in our last class, the book by Abbe Baruel and the book by Nestor Webster, and also those short articles by Father Luke and by the Serbian nuns. And when I send out the notes tonight, I'm going to send out those links again to those resources. Right? English and American visitors to France in the 1770s and 1780s. And these are English and Americans were people who had no particular motivation to praise France. Right? They didn't like the French generally. Right? But they reported a well-ordered, prosperous society with a highly educated and philanthropic clergy. The French clergy were very well educated, and they were generally very close to their parishioners. Okay? And they commanded a great deal of respect among the ordinary people. So Dickens' nightmare picture, I don't know if any of you have read Tale of Two Cities.
I couldn't.
You couldn't take it. So his nightmare picture of an unrelieved, vast, starving wasteland of urban proletariat licking spilled wine off the street. There's a scene where the people are starving and they have no wine, they have nothing, and a cask of wine falls and breaks on the street, and they go running. They're starving and they're miserable, and they go and lick the wine up out of the street because they're so hungry and thirsty. Peasants reduced to eating grass. Okay, conscientious do-gooders wasting away in the Bastille, a Bastille crowded with innocent political prisoners. Actually, there were no prisoners. There were no prisoners. They found one or two old people who lunatics or something. Yes, it's ridiculous, right? And a uniformly vicious ruling class, all corrupt, all cynical, all evil. Right? This is a Victorian Gothic fantasy. Okay, it's invented to titillate the pious horror of vicars' wives, little clergy wives at their tea parties. Oh, I'm glad we're not like the French. Okay, overwrought consumptives, little delicate public school boys are little delicate girls sitting in their sick beds, being horrified by the terrible behavior of the French.
So he couldn't have done it just by him, as an innocent.
I don't know. I think he believed it.
It's too consistent.
It's very consistent. Yes. Okay. So that's the myth and that's the reality. Now, there's another book. I brought it here tonight. I'm going to show it to you. It's by a man named Dr. Warren Carroll. He passed away a few years ago. He was a Roman Catholic historian. And he wrote a historical series from a Catholic point of view. And we really need to write this book. His series is inspiring to me because we need to write a similar book from the Orthodox point of view. He did a very good job from his point of view. And he wrote a volume on Christendom under attack by the Revolution, but he wrote a little separate, a little companion volume called Guillotine and the Cross, emphasizing the martyrdom of the Catholic clergy and so forth who were killed by the Revolution. But I'm going to do a quote from Dr. Carroll because he summarizes the whole degeneration of the political process in a way that's very revealing because it applies into these future revolutions. The chronology of events and the constantly changing stated goals of the revolution, right? It's always evolving, right? Are very revealing because the fundamental logic, the grim necessity of their degeneration from so-called reform to complete depravity. They always start out saying they're just going to reform the system. We just want to reform the system. We just want to fix a few things. Then it gets worse and worse and worse and it ends up in complete destruction, depravity, and evil, right? And this process keeps being repeated. It's going to be repeated in the Bolshevik Revolution and other violent revolutions. Rapidly, when we think of the communist revolutions of the 20th century, these are rapid, violent revolutions. But this same process happens gradually in the soft cultural Marxist revolution in the Western countries. Okay? Or the countries, I shouldn't say just Western, because some of the Western countries underwent violent revolution. France, Spain, Mexico underwent violent revolution, and also the Latin American republics underwent violent revolution. But the countries, so really it's not West and East, it's really the countries that underwent violent revolution, the countries that underwent gradual revolution. Greece, for example, is an Eastern country, but its revolution, except for the abortive civil war by the communists, it's really been a more gradual overturning of Greece. Okay. So Dr. Warren Carroll, this Roman Catholic historian, describes all the progress of the revolution from reform to total destruction and the violent spread of godlessness in this book on the Catholic martyrs of the Revolution called Guillotine and the Cross. In the original, this passage I'm about to read is one paragraph, but I've broken it up into several short paragraphs to show clearly the chronology the author describes. So to back up a little bit, again, as I've said many times in our class, I'm sort of assuming that we have a fundamental grasp, or at least a school child's grasp of these great events. So remember, the revolution begins in 1789, but it begins with a constitutional or a legal gathering, the gathering of the Estates General, which had not taken place for a long time. The king felt pressured. He needed to raise taxes to replenish the royal treasury. He felt pressured to call the Estates General. The estates were the first estate was the clergy, the second estate was the nobility, and the third estate were the common people. And it was a gathering of all. It was like a great national assembly. Okay? He felt but the revolutionaries then used this legal assembly to start the whole process. You see. So, of course, the king would have been well advised, and given the revolutionary spirit of the times, he would have been well advised not to have called this assembly. Just as Tsar Nicholas would have been well advised not to have allowed them to establish the Duma in Russia. But they were trying to see, both Tsar Nicholas and King Louis XVI had something in common, which is that they were soft-hearted. And they thought they were doing the right thing by trying to work with people. And they just didn't realize the depth of the evil of the people they were dealing with. So let's go to this. And so it went from in the 1 year of 1789. It went from in the spring of 1789 to simply being a legal assembly of the Estates General, and rapidly moved into a revolutionary mode. And then by 1792, they were seriously talking about murdering the king. In January of 1793, they killed the king, and they had already disestablished the church, or rather created a state church separate from the church, their own patriotic church, totally under the control of the revolutionary government. But in May of 1789, no one would have admitted that this was the goal, except a few, philosophers like Voltaire and so forth, who was dead by this time. Yeah. So I'm quoting from Carroll now. So first, in May of 1789, in the beginning, when in May 1789 the Estates General had met, the Conservatives, so there are three groups. We're going to go through the evolution of three groups: the Conservatives, the Center, and the Radicals. The Conservatives stood with the king. The Center wanted a national legislature that would be to a significant degree independent of the king. And the Radicals wanted a constitution that would sharply limit the powers of the king. So in May 1789, even the most radical are still saying, yes, we're going to have a king. We just want a constitution that's going to limit his powers. That's the most radical they got in May. But in June of 1789, there was the tennis court oath, where the Third Estate representatives bolted. They went to a tennis court, and they took this oath, basically to establish a republic. But after the tennis court oath, the Conservatives wanted the Constitution, but still with the king. And the Center wanted a constitution with a major share in the government, and the Radicals wanted full control of the government with the king reduced to a figurehead. So even after the tennis court oath, and there's a great engraving of the tennis court oath. It's this mob, and it's an indoor tennis court. There's this mob of screaming people with contorted faces, all raising up their hands to take this oath. They're obviously and the picture was made by someone someone who's sympathetic to them. But you can tell from their faces that they're demonic. Or the famous murals by David. I've seen some of the originals. They're in a museum in Vézille in eastern France. There's a museum of the Revolution. It's inside. It's kind of deceptive. It's a beautiful 17th century chateau, but on the inside it's a museum of the Revolution. And I saw some of these monumental paintings by David, and it shows the revolutionaries in full course of their battles, their assemblies, their actions, and their faces. And this is painted by a man who is sympathetic to them, and their faces, they're obviously demonized. Horrible faces, terrible contortions of their bodies and so forth, and the women all semi-naked and showing themselves, and it's just something terrible. So anyway, I thought of that because of this image. I remember the tennis court oath. So, but even after the tennis court oath in June of 1789, with basically the failure of the Estates General and it turning into a revolutionary body. Even then, the Conservatives still wanted a constitution, but with the king. The Center wanted a constitution with a major share in the government. And the Radicals wanted a full control of the government with the king reduced to a figurehead. But by July of 1789, what happens in July? July 14th, the storming of the Bastille, which, as Mr. Constantine pointed out, actually had no prisoners in it. It was a completely fabricated idea that they were holding political prisoners in the Bastille. And these people stormed. They killed the guards. They chopped off the head of the governor of the Bastille and one other official and paraded around the streets with their heads on pikes. Yeah. Men who had done nothing to them, men who had done nothing wrong. Right? But after the Bastille, the Conservatives wanted a constitution with a major share in the government. The Center wanted full control of the government with the king reduced to a figurehead, and by that time the Radicals were already saying they wanted the king in prison. So in May, the Radicals were saying, we just want to limit the powers of the king, but a few months later, 2 months later, they're already saying we want the king in prison. Okay. October of 1789, after the storming of Versailles and the imprisonment of the king in October 1789, so they arrested the king. It didn't take them long, from May to October. Right, 5 months, they stormed Versailles and they arrested the king. They put him they locked him up. At this point, the Conservatives still wanted full control of the government, but with the king a figurehead, but eventually freed. He's still the king. We've got him locked up, but he's still the king. We'll free him eventually. The Center wanted the helpless king as a prisoner. The Center said, we'll keep him as king, but we're going to keep him in prison as a king. And the Radicals began to look to just getting rid of the king altogether, a republic. The king tried to escape in June of 1791. The king tried to escape to Varennes, and he was recaptured in June of 1791. At that point, the Conservatives wanted to keep the king, but as a prisoner. The Center wanted him removed, but not just yet. And the Radicals wanted him removed immediately. No king. Let's just get rid of the king. August 1792. After August 10th, 1792, the Conservatives wanted to remove the king, but send him into exile. rather than kill him. The center was satisfied to see him dead, so that the center, the moderates, were already saying, all right, let's just kill him. But wanted a cabinet-style government with an orderly, dignified legislature, some rights of local self-government. They wanted, yeah, we're going to get rid of the king, but we're going to have rule of law. And the radicals were already saying they wanted to execute the king without a trial, and they wanted to impose their total ideology in every corner of France and all the rest of the world. They were openly proclaiming violent revolution, and violently exporting the revolution to other countries.
Trotsky.
Trotskyism, yes. And finally, the judicial murder of the king. Books all say the execution. I prefer the term judicial murder, because it really is a murder, but they use the courts to do it. They have the fig leaf of legality, right? I feel about the execution of the Tsar. He wasn't executed. They were butchered in a demonic ceremony, right?
And the child was.
Yes.
You know what happened to
the Dauphin. Well, they were most cruel to the Dauphin on several counts. One is that they accused his mother of having incest with him, which is just utterly diabolical that they would make this one of the charges, right? Then after they killed his parents, they locked him up, and they made him wear revolutionary clothing, the sans-culotte, and they made him say revolutionary slogans and so forth. They abused him, they starved him.
Who knows what else?
And nobody, they probably poisoned him. Other things, and who knows what kind of things they did. They probably did to him what they said the good people had done to him, right? So after the execution of the king, the conservatives still sought orderly government and local rights. The center cried for more centralization of government power, and the radicals decided the time had come to visit the fate of Louis XVI upon the conservatives. So by 1793, the Jacobins, the radicals, are saying, you know what? Well, yeah, we killed the king. Now we're going to kill you too. We're going to kill the Girondists.
Thanks for helping.
Yes, they're useful idiots. Thanks for helping. Now we're going to kill you too. Okay, so basically there were two. There was really more than two parties, but fundamentally there were two parties: the Jacobins, who were the radicals, and the people who came to be called Girondins or Girondists, who are the more moderate revolutionaries. Right. Thus, the terror began, 1793 to 1794. It's like Stalin's purge in the 30s. Right? Thank you for helping. Now I'm going to kill all of you. After they murdered the king, the radical revolutionaries, the Jacobins, decided to murder their fellow revolutionaries, the Girondists, who were not quite radical enough. Right? They weren't pure enough, and they weren't having pure enough revolutionary thoughts. Right? They had to be gotten rid of. So the Girondists were still saying, we have to have rule of law of some kind. We can't just rule. We can't. But the Jacobins established this Committee for Public Safety, which was voted, of course, quote unquote, voted by the Assembly, voted a budget of 100,000 francs a month to have secret meetings, to have secret sessions, to execute and try people, to try and execute people. Okay. So this 93 to 94, they have this reign of the Committee on Public Safety, the terror, where they're killing. They're killing. Of course, they're still killing all the churchmen. They're killing the nuns, the priests. They're killing anybody who gets in their way, or anybody who they think breathed an anti-revolutionary thought, but including all their former allies. Right. This is the consistent fate of these useful idiots in every one of these coups d'état that are engineered by the ongoing Masonic revolution of our time. So this pattern happens over and over again. Okay. You have the so-called moderates. The so-called moderates are like the bait that get people to go along with things. Oh, they're moderate. They just, we know that there are radical elements involved, but there are moderate elements, and we're just going to follow them. But what happens to the moderates? They help overthrow the old order, then they get killed too, right? So we see a similar process in the current cultural revolution in our country. Right now, we're looking at various leftists, various degenerates are being thrown to the lions right now by their erstwhile comrades. They discover something wrong with them, right? Harvey Weinstein or whoever, and now I think even now the Clintons are about to get it, I think. See? So this revolution is a monster that devours its own children. It's a never-ending process of destruction, of murder and suicide and death. So what do? They drive people. They expose their past because all these evil people. They have something on each other, right? They'll have a file on each other, right? Because they're all bonded in evil. So they drive them to commit suicide. They hold these show trials, kangaroo trials of various crimes. They have secret assassinations and so forth. Okay. So the Jacobins mostly didn't have secret assassinations. They mostly just were executing people in public. The guillotine, just day after day. And there were these women, these bloodthirsty women would sit in front of the guillotine every day and knitting, and they'd watch this go on. This is their entertainment every day. They were so debased. Right. So there are a number of elements here that keep getting repeated. One is the establishment of a phony church. They took all the clergy and they said, you have to take an oath to the revolutionary government and break your ties to your patriarch, who was, of course, was Rome, right? So you're now a revolutionary church. And actually the king in prison wrote to his confessor and said, I'm only allowed to take confession communion from a priest who's taken the oath. And his spiritual father wrote and said, you may not. So he didn't. He wouldn't take confession or communion from the priest who'd signed the oath because they saw this as an anti-church. It's not the real church, it's the anti-church. Now, looking at all this with our Orthodox lens, we can take spiritual lessons from this whole thing. One is this: once the foundations of the throne and the altar are removed, there's no force on earth that can stop the descent of formerly Christian societies into godlessness, inhumanity. Okay? There's no moderate or constitutional alternative. Okay? That's the idea. So the big dream, the dream of so-called conservatives in America, is we're going to have this society based on our written constitution, and it's going to be moderate, and it's going to be tolerant, and everybody's going to get along. But there's really no alternative to a society founded on the law of God. It's very important not to be fooled by halfway measures, which are only cover-ups for lawlessness. And this was done very clumsily. I mean, in the French Revolution, it's very crude. They have a ridiculous experiment in trying to recreate society. It's very violent, it's very crude, and there's a big pushback. There's a big royalist and Catholic reaction in the 19th century, right? And in Eastern Europe, in our Orthodox countries, the revolution is very crude. Okay? But in the Western countries, it's, except for places like France and Spain, where there was a violent revolution, it's been very subtle and it's very gradual. Okay? The danger of the whole Anglo-American system is that it really works. Right? To a great extent, it is an orderly society. To a great extent, it is ruled by law. But the poison of secularism and humanism just seeps in, but it's going much more slowly.
Legalized crime, basically.
It's legalized. Yes, it's legalized crime. Yeah. So there's no moderate or constitutional alternative to a society founded on the law of God. It's very important not to be fooled by these halfway measures. Secondly, all of the modern revolutions have produced and are producing rivers of blood. A continuous, remorseless slaughter. It's unprecedented in any historical epoch. It's unprecedented. Now, we live in a society where we don't have a civil war in the streets here in America, at least not yet. But if you look at the enlightened, liberal, democratic governments of Western Europe and North America, since World War II, Leonidas told me that he read a study that 1 billion children have been killed in abortion. 1 billion. Okay, that's more than all the victims of all known wars put together. Okay. So this remorseless slaughter is going on, except it's going on in operating tables and so forth. But it is going on, and we have to realize this is demonic. And these people they're driven to slaughter. They're driven. I mean, when you think of that, a lot of the abortionists are actually women.
Moms.
They're mothers themselves, And you read accounts where they brag about cutting the little baby's vocal cord so it doesn't scream while they're chopping it up. Yeah. So this is utterly demonic. This is just like the things that the French revolutionaries did. I'll describe one, and I'll leave it at that. There was a friend of the Queen named Madame Lamballe. She came out, I forget where I think this is at the Tuileries Palace, or one of the places where they had besieged the king. She refused to denounce the Queen. When she came out, the revolutionary crowd cut her heart out and ate it.
Yeah. Right.
Then they dismembered her, and then they performed actions I won't mention upon her torso. Okay. This is utterly diabolical. Okay.
Ritualistic.
It's ritualistic, yes, it's ritualistic demonism. All right. And this is still going on. This is still going on. Except now it's going on maybe behind closed doors, or in legal abortion clinics, or in meetings of secret groups of the elite and so forth, but it's still going on. Okay.
Funeral homes.
Yes. And but these people have to slaughter because they're being driven. The demons are riding them. They're riding their backs, right? And the demons are demanding human blood as an offering. It's their food. Okay. The whole point of these revolutions is to institute demonic religion. That's the point. The point isn't equality, liberty, economic justice, blah, blah, blah. The point is to institute demonic religion over all mankind. And demonic religion always involves sexual deviation and human sacrifice, especially the sacrifice of children, the despoliation and sacrifice of children. Okay. But we always have to remember that in the midst of disaster, there's always the possibility of following one's conscience and being heroic. You have to follow your conscience. For example, King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette went to their deaths bravely, forgiving their enemies. Okay. Foreshadowing a very similar statement made later by the Tsar martyr Nicholas II, King Louis said from the scaffold, moments before his death, "I die innocent, I pardon my enemies." And then he says, "I hope that my blood will be useful to the French, that will appease God's anger." He's offering himself as an offering for his people, for God to forgive their sins. See, he's making clear that he understands that evil comes upon a people because of sin. And the only answer is that we have to sacrifice ourselves. We have to follow the Lord who sacrificed himself for us. Only sacrificial love, only to die for one's friends, as our Lord said, is the greatest love. Right? In St. John's Gospel, the night before he died, greater love hath no man than this, than to lay down his life for his friends. We have to do this. Only this can fight this evil. Right? So we have to be willing to be heroes. We may not be in an actual war shooting guns or at a barricade somewhere, but we have to speak the truth. We have to be willing to be marginalized, be willing to suffer, be willing to stand up. And that's the only way.